Hello, and welcome to the SaWGuy podcast.
Like scary movies. What's your favorite scary movie?
Here's Johnny.
We'll tear your soul apart.
The boogeyman is real, and you found him.
Game over, man. Game over.
What do you want?
I want to hear you scream. From the front time, bitch.
Welcome to the SaWGuy podcast, as always on the SaWGuy, and you're joining me for part 2 of a Nightmare on Elm Street series. That's right, part 2. So, I know this is a 2-part episode. There's a lot of research I had to do, but anyways, I'm breaking this down in 2 parts, right? So, part 1, I got down into the whole discussion of Freddy's Revenge, the Dream Warriors, the Dream Master, and the Dream Child. As I said, there's a lot of fucking dreams already. But anyways, this part 2, I'm going to break down for you Freddy's Dead, which is part 6, Wes Craven's New Nightmare, which a lot of people consider part 7, and the true ending of A Nightmare on Elm Street, and the remake. Dun dun dun, I know. And I know a lot of you are thinking and probably commenting down there right now, what the fuck, what about Freddy vs. Jason? I'll get to that, don't worry. I'm going to have to do a whole separate episode on that, because that's a story of its own, you know. I lived that whole thing, so that's why. But anyways, since I'm going back to the Nightmare on Elm Street series, as I had already said in the last video, was part 5, a lot of people really didn't like it. And they didn't like it because the whole storyline was just kind of very odd, very different. And for me personally, I loved it. You know, I know a lot of people are like, man, you're crazy. Why would that be your favorite Nightmare on Elm Street? That one was my favorite because I got to see it all the time. And it was a taboo back in the day to watch horror films when you were a young kid, you know. So, but anyways, with that whole part 5 coming out with the Dream Child, it wasn't good. So when they came back with part 6, they said, okay, how are we going to do this story? How are we going to end it? And part 6 was a different beast of its own. It really was, you know. They basically got somebody, I forgot her name, but I know she was a part of the whole Nightmare on Elm Street franchise. She basically started as a desk job, moved into like assistants, and like moved her way all the way up to part 6 when she was finally a director. So it was in good hands, don't get me wrong, you know. And this came out around early 90s, I want to say 90, 91. And basically they didn't even call it a Nightmare on Elm Street. They basically said Freddy's Dead. Or I think they called it Nightmare on Elm Street, Freddy's Dead, something like that, around those taglines. But it was basically their way of saying, this is the last one, we're one and done, that's it. And this whole story was centered around Freddy Krueger's life, which is pretty cool. So it didn't tie in to the TV series, because the TV series, when it came out after part 3 or 4, I want to say it was part 3, when the TV series came out, the first episode basically showed how Freddy Krueger was caught, he was in court, he gets out of court, the parents kill him and they burn him. And this kind of plays into that. Part 6 followed and centered around a woman who ended up being Freddy Krueger's child. Fred Krueger, he had a normal life. He just had a sick fantasy of hurting children. That's all basically part 6 was telling you. It was his whole backstory and how it basically affected his daughter and how she didn't know much. And then the whole story basically follows that into like this big climax ending, right? And this came out at a time when 3D just, you know, happened to be popping out at this time in movies again. You know, I know there was that trend recently and then it kind of phased off, but it didn't start, well, I lost my train of thought. I was going to say, it didn't start like then. It started like way back. I mean, there's movies back in the 80s that tried to do 3D. But anyways, they filmed this in 3D. And it wasn't just your normal 3D. They had to do certain scenes where they, like, put the bat, you know, close to the camera. Or, you know, they had to do random crazy shit, like go all the way up close and then back, you know. But anyways, this whole story, what it did, it surrounded Freddy Krueger's whole life from when he was a teenager. And this one was pretty cool because you had a different story where all the kids are basically dead. Right? And the parents, they're just living their sad lives. You know, there's a carnival scene where they're in the carnival and there's no kids, but it's all the parents. And then there's like 2 or 3 kids. and it had that creepy vibe to it. But at this point, the Nightmare on Elm Street franchise became so big, everybody got involved in it. And in this one alone, you had big ass stars at that time. You had Roseanne and Tom Arnold. They were married, and then that's when the Roseanne craze was really big in the early 90s. You had Alice fucking Cooper, who basically, he already did, I was going to say he was acting in Part 6 and Jason, but he didn't act. He provided the main theme for Jason 6, Jason's Alive or whatever. I can't remember the title right now. Damn camera's staring at me, that's why. But anyways, Alice Cooper was in it, Roseanne, Tom Arnold, and it ended up being this whole big thing, and there was all this hype. And just the way they promoted the shit out of this movie was really cool. They even went down to the Hollywood Cemetery and did a burial of Fred Krueger. So they basically did like this fake funeral where they put Freddy Krueger's, sweater, his glove, his hat, and then they basically said, okay, this film is dead. Dead. We're just going to film this one and Freddy's gone, right? Well, the whole story, I liked it. It was pretty cool. I mean, you can make a fucking TV series right now of Freddy when he was a teenager and how everything had all started. That'd be pretty cool, But this movie just kind of killed all that. So it shows how Fred Krueger was a teenager, how he was a kid, how he would, torture people. Well, not torture people, but torture animals. And then his dad was a drunk and would beat his ass. And his dad was Alice Cooper, by the way. And it would go back into the story of what was going on and things like that. And then it would flash back to how Fred Krueger killed his wife and his daughter had seen it. And then Fred Krueger was just, he didn't hurt his daughter, but he basically said, "You didn't see anything, sweetie." And then he touches her face with his bloody hand. And that's pretty cool how they gave him a backstory on this one. They finally talked everything about it, but this film was completely shot in a way where it's just like, really? It's just, because you had some great names in there. Hell, I even forgot to mention, Johnny Depp was in it. He made a cameo in the scene, They had Breckenmeyer, who writes Robot Chicken and all this other stuff for Adult Swim. And there was a lot of winks that they did to this film. They had the Nintendo Power Glove, and they made a death scene where Breckenmeyer's character was in a video game and everything like that. And so this one, it became super corny. It was basically, Robert Englund said it best himself. It was like Bugs Bunny fucking around like in the Looney Tunes, That's how this film basically was. And, I mean, it's... it basically epitomizes what Freddy had become. He basically became more of a punchline. They took all the scare factor out and they said, okay, we're just going to try and make this film, give him a backstory, give everybody and all the fans who he was, things like that, and we're going to end the series. And that's what they did. But, what sucked about it is that even though they filmed it in 3D, they only filmed certain scenes. Like I said, they did a couple of scenes where they were gearing up, getting all the weapons, and they put their stuff right close to the camera and stuff. And it's just, it was disappointing for me as a fan to see that one, because obviously you knew it's the last one, it's over, it's done. But it just, I mean, going back and watching it, I appreciate it now, because when they ended it, you thought it was done. It wasn't. It really wasn't, And the reason why the series wasn't done is because the owner of New Line Cinema, he basically thought, okay, Wes Craven built this franchise for me. I took a shit all over on it. That's basically his thought, I'm assuming. That's not written in record. That's my assumption. Okay, let's be fair about that. And he gave Wes Craven one more shot to do a Nightmare movie. But it had nothing to do with part 2 through 6. It had nothing to do with it. And he basically gave him the green light to do this new story. And it would follow all the original ideas of what Wes Craven had really wanted. So this new Nightmare series was actually called Wes Craven's New Nightmare. Which, I love this fucking concept. Because basically, this whole story, everybody is who they are. It's an actor within an actor of a movie, right? So Heather Langenkamp, she's the one who played Nancy. It follows her life and how shit's going on and everything like that. And how she's married to her husband, who's also a special effects guy. And he works in, horror movies. Well, he's working on Nightmare on Elm Street, and I guess it's a sequel or a reboot. They never really explained what it was, but he was working on Nightmare on Elm Street. He gets killed, and I'm oh man, I was just laughing because the way he gets killed. I'm not laughing at that. I'm laughing because there's a scene before Freddy puts his claw up and gets him in the chest. I have no reason, no belief why they put this scene in, but it shows he's driving and then he's scratching his balls. like, why the hell would you put that scene in there? You know, but hey, I don't, that's out of my pay grade, you know. But anyways, I'm laughing at that because that's the only thing I remember out of that scene is the guy scratching his balls and then he gets killed. But anyways, you know, they follow the whole story of it's a movie within a movie because then later on, after her husband dies, she goes on to this TV show, and then Robert Englund comes out dressed as Freddy. And then what's pretty cool is that at the talk show, all these kids are all dressed up as Freddy, and they start talking about, like, hey, was this actually true? Was this not true? And Heather Langenkamp, she had a son, and a lot of people recognize the son. I think his name is Miko, but he was the kid who played Gage in Pet Sematary, and he had a lot of acting credibility in his name because doing TV and all that stuff. But anyways, he played her son, and the whole story followed about how Freddy Krueger was messing with her son to get to her. And at the same time, while this is going on, she's like reaching out to everybody who's acted in the film. So they show like the cemetery scene where they're burying her husband and stuff, and then you see all the original actors from every one of the Freddy Krueger movies, and it was pretty cool. Like they did a lot of little winks into that one. Wes Craven wrote and he directed this whole thing, and when they actually finally showed Freddy Krueger how he is in Wes Craven's new Nightmare, they played him off as that he was a real demon from Wes Craven's thoughts, and that's how it started. And the whole movie only is happening because Wes Craven is working on the film while in the film. Mind blown, right? Yeah, I know. I had to watch it a few times to understand all the concepts in it. But anyways, there's a scene where she goes and sees West, and then as they're talking, it's like already right there on the computer. So basically he tells her, okay, you're going to have to fight this once and for all. And what's pretty cool is they brought back almost everybody who was still around at that time to the to the Freddy Krueger Nightmare on Elm Street series, right? They brought everybody. I think obviously Johnny Depp, he was too big of a star. They couldn't get him in. But anyways, this whole story was basically following the myth that Freddy Krueger was a demon and he was real and he was fucking with people, right? There was a lot of death scenes in this film. There was a lot of callbacks to a lot of death scenes. And the way they designed Freddy was just fucking creepy. They just did a fucking great job on it. You know, they brought back the original makeup artist from the first one. They basically said, okay, we're going to redesign Freddy. We're going to make him not look burnt, but we're going to make him look like his skin is split. He pulled his skin pieces out. He's not going to have a claw, per se, but the the knives are going to be right on his fingertips, like, comes right out. And what was different about this, it was cool, because they made him, like, wear a trench coat, his normal outfit, and it's all clean. And then he has the black cowboy fedora hat, the brown trench coat. What's funny, the trench coat wasn't fucked up, but his sweater was. That was the only thing that I noticed on that. But anyways, he had the whole claw set up, and then he had one on his thumb, which I was like, okay, that's a little different, but I get where they were going with this, right? You got to understand, it was following a myth that Freddy was real. That's what this movie was playing on, and that's how the first Nightmare on Elm Street came about. You got to remember, it's a movie within a movie, right? And it was written really good. The acting was fucking phenomenal. And, even the death scenes, there was a lot of callbacks and winks. They did the same scene that Tina, where she was pulled up and they killed on the top and then dropped. But what I thought was brutal was they actually showed Freddy dragging her, and they showed that the little kid, he was sitting down and watching the whole thing, reaching out like, and Freddy, he said some of the best lines in that film. Hey kid, ever played Skin the Cat? And that was really cool. And then they had this elaborate scene where basically Heather Langenkamp basically said, if you have any issues, go home, right? So as everything's going on in the hospital, that whole scene went down, the kid escapes, as the kid escapes, they show this elaborate scene where he's running through the freeway, and Freddy Krueger, that he's like right on the cloud, and then he has this big ass claw. He picks up the kid and lifts him up away from the car so he doesn't get hit and stuff like that. Just toying with him, cat and mouse, right? Shows that there's like the end embankment, and then you see a bunch of Freddys coming up. I mean, that shit was brutal, you know. And it was really cool how they did that scene. And then basically the big standoff, it was, you know, the kid, he gets taken into Freddy's world. Heather Langenkamp, she basically realizes she's in a movie now because she sees John Saxon, and then he starts talking to her like she's Nancy, right? And it was a weird trip to that. And then she turns around, she's back home at the Nightmare on Elm Street house, which is a little weird. And so she goes in, falls asleep, goes into his world. They had this big standoff, and then they show Freddy. I would say this Freddy, he's more of a gothic version, which is badass. I mean, they if you can improve anything on the character, they hit it out of the ballpark with that one. That was really good how they improved it. But anyways, the whole standoff was, he was trying to go after the kid, mess with the kid. They ended up killing Freddy. They wake up, and as they wake up, they're back in their original home. And, you know, she opens this book, and it's done by Wes, and Wes Craven, he signs it. And so, you know, her son, it says, okay, well, can you read me this story? So basically then she starts reading her son everything that happened within that movie. Mind blown, right? I mean, for what it was highly rated, really good. The acting was phenomenal, as I said. The only thing that sucked, though, it didn't do good in theaters. And it didn't do too good in theaters because of the fact New Line, they said, okay, we're done with the Freddy franchise. We're not going to go back to it. And they basically kept word on it, you know, because they didn't do a Nightmare on Elm Street film. They basically did Wes Craven's New Nightmare. So it was a different take on it, you know. But what I liked about it, there was a lot of winks to it. They did a lot of callbacks through all of them. Freddy Krueger, he wasn't very punny, you know, because Wes Craven didn't make him have that many puns. So he made him look more dark and sinister. And Wes Craven, he did a fucking phenomenal job for this film. It's highly underrated. If you've never seen it, I know for a fact Hulu, they just took off all the Freddy Krueger movies and Nightmare on Elm Streets. I know. I was pissed off too. Like, are you serious? Only 1 month? But I know they should have it on Amazon Prime. I've seen Wes Craven's New Nightmare for like $5, you know, on Blu-ray, floating around somewhere at a Walmart. But if you haven't seen it, take a look at that one, because that one was really good and it's very underrated. And a lot of people that I talk to, they all say that's one of the great ones, but they don't consider it a Nightmare on Elm Street series film, right? Because it was so different. It was a movie within a movie. And that was the last film that you heard for a long time, was that one. Because that one came out in 94. And when that one came out, they didn't have too much media hype. The only media hype that they got for that film was New Line, or I think it was Paramount. I think it was New Line. They had just bought the rights to Jason. They just filmed Jason Goes to Hell. And in that last scene where you see Jason's mask, Freddy Krueger's hand pops out and pulls the mask down. And that ended up being the seeds for Freddy vs. Jason, which was fucking phenomenal. I mean, you have that hype backing up, then you come out with a movie, Wes Craven's New Nightmare. A lot of people thought that it was going to build up to Freddy vs. Jason. Obviously, that didn't work out. And, you know, Freddy vs. Jason, I'm going to have to save for another episode because there's a whole backstory. Because that movie was in developmental hell for 10 years. They couldn't decide on an idea, director, or people to work on it and things like that and get the ball rolling. But anyways, Wes Craven's New Nightmare was the last one that they officially did. Robert Englund, he still ended up playing Freddy Krueger in Freddy vs. Jason. But that ended up being the last one that he did. Sadly. I know, it sucks. He basically came out and said, I retired. So, Robert Englund, he doesn't do Freddy Krueger movies anymore. Obviously, he'll have his hands in anything Nightmare on Elm Street related. He still does cons. You know, I think he recently did one, I think a couple years back. Maybe a couple months ago, if I'm not mistaken. He was at a con, one of the big ones, and dressed up in full makeup as Freddy Krueger, which was really cool. I mean, he gave back to the fans, so. But he doesn't do it anymore. So that leads me to build up to the remake, right? I know a lot of people fucking hated this remake. I don't know why. I personally loved it. but I'm an odd one. I like a lot of different things. But anyways, in 2010, they decided, okay, screw it. We're going to do a Nightmare on Elm Street reboot. I mean, we're going to do the whole shebang. Start from the ground up. And they did great on it. They really did. There was a little bit of hype, not a whole lot. They basically redid the soundtrack. And I don't think they redid it. I think they more or less modernized it to how it sounds, how it would be, more terrifying. And when they did this film, they did it more in a sense that Freddy Krueger was supposed to be scary. There was puns, just not, as much as like Dream Warriors or Dream Master, right? So the whole time when they were building up the hype of this film, nobody knew who was going to be Freddy Krueger. They decided on Jackie Earle Haley. And if you've never seen Jackie Earle Haley, he was in Watchmen. He was the guy Rorschach who wore the white mask and it would move all around. And he fucking owned that role. He really did. And they showed him a couple times on Mask, and it's just like, whoa, he's the fucking perfect Freddy Krueger. If you had to replace Robert Englund, that's who I would go with, right? And interesting enough, with Jackie Earle Haley, he auditioned for Johnny Depp's role in the first one. He actually was friends with Johnny Depp, drove him to the audition, and they chose Johnny Depp over him. So, I mean, it was kind of cool, bittersweet in a way that he got to come back to the franchise, but he got to come back as Fred Krueger, the main character. You have Clancy Brown in this film, and you have other named actors. They weren't too big yet, but you had other actors in there. You had, God, I can't remember his name, but he was in that dumb movie I didn't like, Jennifer's Body. I can't remember his name. But anyways, he was one of the kids in it. Yeah, Rooney Mara, and she starred in another remake, The Girl with a Dragon Tattoo, and yeah, that's a different story. But anyways, you had decent acting, right? A lot of these new actors are fresh faces, decent acting, and they played into the whole story of the original Nightmare. And it starts off with, this kid, he's like in a diner, and he's saying Freddy Krueger's coming to get him. He's been awake, and then all of a sudden, Freddy Krueger picks him up. He gets him to cut his own throat, and then boom, Nightmare on Elm Street remake. Wow. I mean, you just came in with a force, and it goes into the whole notion. It basically retells the original one, but modernized, right? They don't show Freddy much like in the original. They basically show him as more of a dark silhouette and everything. But what I loved about this is that Jackie Earle Haley owned this role. I mean, he knew he couldn't be Robert Englund, so he did his own little twerks, right? Some of my favorite little twerks he did is that when he's wearing the glove, he did this weird thing, doing it with the claw. And some of the kills scenes were just like brutal with it. There was the one scene where he was going after the boyfriend, and he basically, had gutted him and then hanged him upside down and says, "Hey, we still got playtime. The heart's still beating, but the heart doesn't beat, but the mind's still alive for another 7. Well, it's alive for 7 minutes. That means we got 5 minutes of playtime." I mean, just that was just like, whoa, okay. And then the whole story with Clancy Brown, he ended up being the principal of the school, and everybody kept trying to keep quiet about Fred Krueger. Nobody wanted to know about Freddy Krueger. And then they twist this whole story around, which I love what they fucking did with this, right? Here's the twist with it. They basically were playing into the notion that Fred Krueger was, wrongly convicted, and he didn't do these things to the children, and they might have killed the wrong person, They shouldn't have killed him because, maybe the kids were lying, right? It played into that whole aspect of it. And I was just like, whoa, okay, mind blown on this. But they didn't say that he was a child murderer. They actually went with the fact that he's a child molester. They never showed anything, but they actually played on that less is more approach, which made it that much more scarier, right? And I love that whole concept that they did, because the whole movie now, you're trying to figure out, why is Freddy Krueger killing these kids? Is he killing them because he was wrongly killed, because he was innocent the whole time? Or he's just doing it because, he's a sick motherfucker. And that's what this whole movie plays on. And you didn't have that in the original, because they just said he's a child murderer, This one, he's a child molester, but you don't know that till the end. And then you find out why he's going after the two main kids. Why is he going after Nancy and her friend, right? Why is he going after them? Well, you end up seeing little bits of flashback, and that's the only downfall I liked, or didn't like actually, was they showed too much of the mystique. That's the only thing. Does that make sense? Like, they basically showed how he was a groundskeeper at this tiny little school. He would play with the kids, give you that weird, creepy vibe. And, then he would say he has a special place he takes these kids to. And, it just, yeah. I mean, that one was really brutal. And, for the life of me, I still don't know why nobody liked it. I mean, for a remake, it was great. I mean, let me know in the comments below what you guys think about the remake, because everybody I've always talked to, they all got pissed off and said that they hated it. And I think the main thing why people hate it is because they weren't used to somebody else playing Freddy Krueger. And I get that, Robert Englund will always be Fred Krueger. Nobody will ever take that role from him. Nobody can ever change that role from him. But, Jackie Earle Haley came in and he knew that. And he knew he had to make his own little quirks, make his own little dark puns, do these different things like he does with the claw. And what's crazy about this one is they did less makeup but more CGI. They did the same CGI that did Two-Face from The Dark Knight. So it looked realistic, like he was more of a realistic burn victim. He had the white eye, and they were like kind of swollen, and then he was like burnt to a crisp, and the whole claw, they made it look more realistic in a sense, where he couldn't move it because of the fact, like, if you look at the claw, if you look on Google and type in Nightmare on Elm Street remake glove, right, you'll see that they realistically built this glove to be realistically used. I'm not lying. I can't make this shit up. They put like different bands so that way when he moves it, the band pulls the glove and gives it a tighter fit and everything. And I didn't know any of that until I was doing my research, and I was like, what? They did a lot of detail work on this one. And I think Wes Craven, he didn't work on it, but I think he was more of a consultant, and he didn't get credited for it. He basically said, okay, well, Fred Krueger's like this. Yeah, that'd be cool in a different world, but this would work, And I just love how they played off in the soundtrack with the remake. But overall, I mean, for what it was and how the remake was made, I enjoyed it. I loved it. A lot of people don't like it, but, Jackie Earle Haley, you did a damn good job at playing Freddy Krueger. It's not your fault, I don't know. I mean, I'm on the fence about it, but I love the fact that they still carry on the remake style, because now that the whole Nightmare on Elm Street and Fred Krueger, they became an icon in the horror community, basically. They brought Fred Krueger back for video games, obviously for Mortal Kombat. They brought him back in, anything that you see as Fred Krueger, it's more based not on the Robert Englund style, but more of the Jackie Earle Haley, which is cool, because I love that style, how he looked. But if you're going to talk about the whole original, you got to talk about Robert Englund. And nobody can ever replace that. I mean, Robert Englund was the voice. He is Fred Krueger, right? But let me know your thoughts below, guys. I mean, I'm really curious, because I love what they did to it. But unfortunately, since it didn't do too well in theaters like they hoped they would have, like every other remake that's been coming out, they basically abandoned it. So now that we're in 2018... there's talk that they're trying to redo the series, but they don't know if they should do it as a movie or should they do it as a TV show. Because the trend right now is that everybody is getting their own TV show. They're doing a TV show where it shows the life and the backstory before something happens, Like they're showing, obviously Batman and the whole Gotham series, all about Commissioner Gordon, how he became a commissioner. And it's similar how they're going to do it probably like on Nightmare on Elm Street. Somebody had actually made a really good they did a fan-made trailer and said it was coming on Netflix, and I thought it was actually true, and I posted it on my site until one of my fans on there said, no, that's fake, and I was just like, what? Are you serious? I got so bummed out. I really did, because I never, like, I love what people do and the creativity on it, but if it's a legit thing, I lose my shit. You guys seen my reaction video on Halloween, how I was, That's how most horror fanboys like me do it. But yeah, I mean, honestly, that's my take on the whole Nightmare series, guys. I know I had to do 2 parts because there was so much information. There was a lot of shit that I had to cover. Fred Krueger, he's a pop culture icon right now. And, you know, anybody who's lived through the 80s, the 90s, and even now, they can tell you the whole backstory about Fred Krueger. Oh, yeah, he's the guy that gets you in your dreams, you know? Everybody knows it. You know, no one's going to say, oh, that's the guy with a hockey mask, right? You'd be surprised. I hear that a lot sometimes, you know? But, honestly, I love the whole Nightmare series. And like I said, I had to bring it to you guys just because, you know, I didn't want to give the first episode. I didn't want to give the first movie out there and then just leave the whole stone unturned. I mean, that's just basically like making Kool-Aid without the Kool-Aid, you know? Then you just have a bottle of water, you know? But I appreciate you guys for tuning in and following me on this special 2-part episode. And as always, once I'm done and out, guys, you know where it goes, right?